Okay, I'm going to move on now, and I'm going to talk a little bit about queuing. And I need to introduce that first of all. So on the screen, you have a frequency chart. And what the frequency chart shows is the delay in a particular organization. It happens to be an API manufacturing organization, but it shows the delay between the arrival of material in the warehouse and the first shipment of that material. Now again, I referred earlier on to raw material arrival patterns and also to the arrival pattern of bulk tablets, for example, if you're going to blister them later on. They're very similar to this. So if you look at the pattern here, you'll see that at the very start, on the left-hand side of the distribution chart, there's a peak, and then there's a gradual decline, a very, very flat, wide curve going off out to the right. And what that's telling you is that there are some items, there are some lots that when they arrive in stores, they really are quite urgently required, but there are other lots that are not urgently required at all. So a very important point, if you think back about the practices or the key things I asked earlier on, what can you do in terms of leveling? The first one was do a day's work every day, but the second one was always deal with the genuinely urgent items first. And it's very important to realize that most QA functions, when they're talking about release, when they're talking about even deviations or investigations, all of the items that are waiting to be done are not equally important. And that's a very important point. Very important from a queuing point of view, very important from a leveling point of view. Okay, so again, sticking with a similar theme, the slide that's currently on the screen shows you basically what you're trying to do by leveling and queuing. So I should explain that one way of leveling is to queue. So items don't necessarily get dealt with in the same pattern as they arrive in. So you can see here that on one day 7 items arrive, next day 1, next day 1, next day 4, next day 7, and so on. But even though the amount of work that arrives every day varies hugely, we always do 4 items every day because the level demand rate is 4. So queuing is one of the things that enables you to achieve that kind of leveling, and therefore it's very valuable. Now I've just shown you that, for example, all of the lots arriving in stores, and therefore the batch records arriving for release in QA are not equally urgent. And that means that while some of them cannot queue, some of them can, and that's very valuable to us. So I just give you 2 phrases that I think you may find useful. One of them is that a little queuing goes a very long way, and hopefully I'll be able to show that to you now. So you don't need an awful lot of queuing to deliver a big productivity improvement. And another phrase that might similarly be useful to you is that a little leveling also goes a long way. In other words, it's quite rare actually to be able to achieve complete leveling. In fact, it almost never happens. And sometimes, you know, despite your best efforts, you're still quite a long way from achieving actual leveling. But the fact that you're more level than you were is very valuable. So any improvement in leveling helps you. And a little queuing and a little leveling go a very long way. So what I'm now showing you is a very simple high-level flowchart of, let's say, planning activities in an overall pharmaceutical value stream. So when I talk about planning, I always talk about 3 boxes. The first box is requirements planning. And what that answers you is, or the question that answers is, well, what do we actually need to make in order to meet the requirements of the supply chain? So, and I would just point out to you that because of the nature of the pharmaceutical industry, in your MRP calculations, there's often a very substantial safety stock or strategic stock element. And what that means is that when MRP is telling you that you need something, some of the things it's telling you need are very urgent, and some of them are not especially. So the second box then is what I call production planning, and that's saying, well, I know what I need to make, but what am I actually going to make now? And very often that won't be the same as what MRP has told you. And for example, that could be because you operate in campaigns. So if your planning system is telling you, oh, I need 1 batch of that item, you might say, well, maybe I need 1 batch, but I always make campaigns of 4 batches. So now you've been told you need 1 batch, there's a big safety stock element in that. Now you've made 4 batches. What does that mean? It means that maybe one of them is very urgent, but certainly 3 of them are not particularly urgent. Next item is, next question is, well, did we make what we planned to make? Of course, that may not always be the case. But I'm now moving down into the QA area, and so that my next box is what I'm calling release scheduling. Now, people may not think that there's a process of release scheduling, but I think in effect there is. So what I'm suggesting here, in terms of a concept design for real lean in QA, is that the question we've got to ask ourselves is, which of the batches that were produced this week are really, really urgent and must be prioritized? So that's a very important part of our process, identifying the items that really, really are urgent and need to be done first. And that brings you on then to 3 items. The first one, which people who are familiar with BSM's lean lab activities will be very familiar with, and that's leveled QC testing. So we're testing in a leveled way, but we're testing the items that are really, really required first. We're testing them first. On the QA side, we're talking about leveled exception processing. So I'm talking here primarily about deviations investigations. So we're talking about operating in a level way, dealing with the genuinely urgent items first. And the end result of all of that is leveled release activity. So we've dealt with our exceptions in a level way, we've done our QC testing in a level way, and finally, we've got leveled release activity. So, okay, that's the concept. That's what we're trying to achieve. And hopefully what you see coming next will give you some indication as to how that might be achieved.